Well, I'm here back with another conversation about health and nutrition. We've done these since the beginning of our program. We've talked to all kinds of medical doctors and folks, but today we're going to get into the realm of basically getting away from the conventional MD paradigm, looking at root causes, functional medicine. We have Dr. Carrie Berkovich. How you doing?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. So you tell us a little bit about your background here. You kind of came from the world of periodontology, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's correct. I came from the world of conventional allopathic dentistry medicine. I was educated in the Western system. My background is that I'm currently a diplomate of the American Board of Periodontology and Dental Implant Surgery, but I no longer practice, although I maintain my active membership with education that is connected to it. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois in Chicago bachelor's program in biochemistry, followed by the graduate program in dentistry at Northwestern University in Chicago. And then I continued on to become a specialist, which was another 3 years of surgical residency training in periodontology, dental implant surgery. And that also, at the conjunction of with that, I have earned the Master of Science degree in oral biology. I have 25 years of clinical experience in the trenches, seeing patients, treating patients. And I made a conscious decision to stop doing that, especially when I moved to Florida. I used to practice in California, and all my clinical experience was linked to that practice that I have began pretty much from the ground up. So I ventured into the field of natural functional medicine, and it wasn't just by chance. I do come from a medical family. My inspiration and everything that I own as far as my drive is my grandmother, God rest her soul, who practiced pretty much integrative medicine most of her life. And she had a long spanning career. She finished practice medicine at the age of 80 and made it all the way to the age of 98 before she passed away. So my understanding did not just come that all of a sudden I started taking seminars when I decided that I won't be a periodontist anymore. I have integrated some of the natural medical, even homeopathy approaches in my surgical practice by trying to heal the whole person, which is the biggest change in allopathic, treating a symptom, versus homeopathic, treating like with like, and natural functional medicine as getting to the root cause of what's troubling the person and the symptom manifestations of basically four basic things that could go wrong.
Yeah, you talk about the root causes. What are those root causes of diseases that you've identified in your work?
So in the functional medicine world, we look at what can potentially drive any and all symptoms that a person would develop and manifest. And those are actually quite straightforward and very simplistic, you may say, but that's what they are. Number one, toxins, and we can talk about what those are. Number two, nutrient deficiencies. Number three, chronic stressors, and that could be physical stress, trauma, mental stress, not being able to let go, not being able to process and continue on living in the present, still rehashing the past. And the last but not least is chronic infections. And by that, I mean bacterial, parasitic, fungal, candida. So all of those four root causes will manifest in different ways. But if you want to truly heal the person, you don't want to have a name and pill for every ill, which is the approach of the allopathic medicine. You want to figure out why they're having a high blood pressure, why they're having issues with a thyroid gland or something like that. So that's the kind of the most important difference. You heal the person, you treat what caused the underlying issue, and that's how they move on to become healthy again.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you mentioned not being able to get past something from the past. I
Yes.
mean, they've turned that into a mainstream ideology in our society today, this idea of not being able to get over your traumas. I mean, that's what they've created this particularly unfortunately targeting women. Women are told to like wallow in their traumas and their victim
Yeah.
status. I mean, everybody is, but they really have been targeted with that message. But that's a chronic stressor. That's not good for your
Yes.
health.
But what's interesting, David, as you mentioned, the victim perception, that's actually a huge factor of not being able to heal. And this perception of victimhood, oh, poor little me, I've been subjected to ABC and I can't cannot get rid of it. And please, the white coat doctor, help me out, lift me out of this. I'm so terrible, I cannot do anything to myself. My hope and my purpose in life right now is to show people the way that they take the reins into their own hands. They become the CEOs of their health. We work through getting them through toxin exposures, emotional traumas, getting their limbic system back up and running, fixing if there was chronic infection issue, nutritional deficiencies, and so forth. But ultimately, you have to be a willing, active participant in your health.
Right. Yeah, that's something that so many folks are told to embrace is this you've got trauma and you have to like and so much of our economy is based, I mean, excuse me, so much of our culture is based on therapeutic culture, which I think, a lot of psychology is masking over symptoms as well, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of things.
Absolutely.
I know there's a famous a guy that we've referenced a little bit on the show named Dr. Broda Barnes, who wrote a lot about the thyroid, and he found that so many of his patients that were having dysfunctional relationships, even divorce, were related to different thyroids. Like one had a low thyroid, one had a high thyroid, and they just couldn't get along because they're on different levels of states
Yeah.
of being, and it just doesn't fit. They think it's something intrinsic to the personality when in reality it's some kind of issue with the energy system, right? The metabolism.
Absolutely. I mean, we are all energy beings. We are all conductants and recipients and transfers of electrical wavelengths, frequencies, if you may. So to take it a further, to step it one step further, would be to say that as energetic beings, if you elevate your vibrational frequency, whether it's through proper lifestyle, good nutrition, having good relationships, will also take your biochemical and physiological health to a totally different level. I will give you a very quick example. Cancer cells don't survive above a particular voltage. Cancer cells don't survive when you give them enough oxygen and you basically destroy them that way because you change the metabolism of the cell, which is the whole other discussion why cancer is a metabolic disease, not some genetic aberration that Western medicine tries to put on. But yes, if you look at toxic relationships, the same way as you would talk as poison, snake venom, exposure to electromagnetic frequency radiation, radiation poisoning, if you understand that your body cannot figure out whether it's a physical stressor, like, let's say poison getting into your body, or a mental stressor, it's going to respond the same way. So a lot of times, the hardest thing for most people is to get rid of those emotional, mental stressors, such as toxic relationships. Oh, I've been married for 15, 20 years. I'm just gonna, make use of it however I can, even though I know it's probably not right for me. Those are the things that will absolutely hinder any sort of healing for any person. I cannot over supplement you over the fact that your lifestyle and your toxic exposures are taking over.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the other things that you identify. What's your take on nicotine? I know that you had indicated to me that perhaps nicotine has been unfairly maligned in the health circle.
Yes. Yes, nicotine, just like a few other things we can discuss later, has been absolutely demonized. And I am not going to say that you should start putting on nicotine patches or start smoking or chewing gum just for the heck of it. Not at all. But as a little background noise on nicotine, we have nicotinic receptors in our body. So there's got to be a reason why God created those molecules, those receptor sites in our bodies for a reason, because I don't think there was just a little fluke. Oh, let's put something extra in you. A lot of vegetables, nightshades, eggplants, tomatoes, celery, potatoes contain nicotine. And I haven't heard yet of anybody being addicted to celery or eggplants and having a celery break from whatever their routine in the office. So nicotine, if you look at it as a pure substance, and I emphasize the word pure, is probably not as addictive, if at all, as mainstream big pharma, big food, big science wants you to believe. In fact, if we look at the work of Dr. Brian Ardis, and I want to give the credit where the credit is due, this is not my research. This is something that I've been searching and looking online and reading and participating in the seminars. I've actually had a chance to meet him. And what he had found out was an absolutely interesting phenomenon. But for the sake of discussion, of this discussion, let's just say that those that are suffering from the lack of smell and taste post exposure to the toxin could be very well helped by utilizing pure nicotine in the form of a gum or in the form of a patch. And this is not hearsay. This is something that has been proven and published. And again, I'm quoting the work of Dr. Brian Ardis here, the lovely chiropractor from Texas, where the credit is due. And the study that he referenced was published in January of 2023. And I quote, the treatment consisted of putting a 7 milligram nicotine patch on people for 6 days in a row. 50% reported symptoms disappearance in 3 days. After 6 days, the nicotine patches were discontinued. By day 14, 100% of the people reporting symptoms of lack of smell and taste, those symptoms were gone. So it does validate a biochemical process, and I can definitely make a reference here if somebody wants to take a look and geek it out with me on the biochemistry level. Here's the review. This is PubMed. This is mainstream, National Library of Medicine, published in International Journal of Molecular Science in 2012. Okay. The title of the article is Alpha-7 Nicotinic Acetylcholine Receptor is a Target in Pharmacology and Toxicology. So even the mainstream recognizes that there's something valid about having this in our brains. Now, we're not going to talk about COVID today much, but just kind of a little food for thought here for people. I just want them to hear what the article states. Antagonists of alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor is a wide group represented by snake venoms and toxins such as chronotoxin and Bungar toxin. The agonist of alpha-7 nicotine acetylcholine receptor is what? Nicotine. So here we go. There is a real pharmacological explanation why utilizing nicotine product, again, I don't mean the smoking, because just for the sake of this conversation, I want to be very clear. Cigarettes, cigars, they contain other additives such as pyrrocine, which is highly, highly addictive and highly, highly cancerogenic, besides a few other things. So I'm not advocating for smoking. However, if you want to try to get rid of tinnitus, to get rid of the loss of taste and smell, what's going to be a harm of using, let's say, nicotine gum? You can use Nicorette. Dr. Brian Ardis recommends the brand called Lucy and Rugby. You can get those on Amazon. And what he says is that if you chew 2 milligram gum for 10 to 20 minutes, 4 times a day, for about 3 weeks, about 2/3 of the people report the dissolution or resolving of their symptoms. That's pretty compelling evidence. It's not going to harm you. You're not going to get addicted to nicotine just because you chew the gum. Now, I will say this, and I've encountered this with people, my clients and patients that I've done this therapy with. Some of them do get nauseous, and some of them cannot take the entire 2 milligram at once, which is fine. I usually say, well, the reason for the nauseous reaction, we call them a detox reactions in functional medicine, is because your body is likely getting rid of the toxin that has been sitting on those receptors, and now it's getting released into the bloodstream. So just like in general, the reactions of nausea or high fever, these are your body's ways of dealing with toxins. So don't be afraid of them. It does not mean that I want everybody feeling sick and nauseous. So we could reduce the dose to, let's say, 1 milligram for 10 minutes and gradually increase it to 2 milligrams. The other strategy that Dr. Brian Ardis talks about is if you take a nicotine patch, I believe those are in either 14 or 16 milligrams, and he cuts it into 6 to 7 pieces and applies each piece on, let's say, his shoulder once a day. And that's kind of the treatment that was described in the study that was published in January of 2023, using a small dose nicotine patch for 6 days. And then within 14 days, 100% of the respondents had their symptoms disappear.
So what's the proposed mechanism?
No,
what's the proposed mechanism of action for restoring?
It's because if you go back further to Dr. Ardis's work, if you look at the content, so to speak, of the bioweapon called COVID-19 poison toxin, it does contain, and I want to be very clear for the audience, I'm not saying there's venom in it, but there's synthetic venom-like peptides derived from conotoxin and Bunger toxin and cobra venom toxins that have been found in feces and urines of so-called COVID-19 virus patients in different countries. So if you understand that there is venom-like peptides that are binding to the alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, if you dislodge them with nicotine, which is a pure agonist, which is like treating like receptors, that's the mechanism of action. It dislodges the poison weight.
Does it, is there any side effects or like addictive behavior or whatever that is found with nicotine itself?
Well, you may have the nausea. That's the most likely side effect, untoward effect, the headache. But again, you have to understand that these are toxin releasing reactions. We call them detox reactions. So they are transient, they're temporary, but yes, they could occur. But you're not going to get addicted to nicotine just by chewing gum.
So many people who have a diet filled with vegetable oils and other toxic foods end up smoking, probably as it's unconsciously, it's their body's medication to dislodge the toxins that they're building up.
Sort of. Actually, to take it one step further, if you look at the statistics during so-called pandemic called COVID-19, most smokers did not have any sort of severity of symptoms like some other people did, like those with diabetes and other vascular issues. And it has to do with the fact that the nicotine had a protective role because it was blocking the binding side of those toxins. You dislodge them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. How about, so nicotine may be not as bad as they've made it out to be. Let's talk about cholesterol. That's something that we've talked about on this show a lot. Are you concerned with cholesterol in your patients?
I am actually concerned by the fact that the mainstream allopathic cardiologists are still using it to institute fear mongering into patients, thinking if they don't reduce their cholesterol, they're going to die of a heart attack or a stroke. So, David, my mission in life is to take as many people off big pharma drugs, and my 3 main ones are cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins, blood pressure-lowering drugs, actually 4, aspirin, and the last one is the acid reducers like Pepsid or Nexium. So, focusing on cholesterol, let's just say the big sentence right away. Cholesterol is not a bad man. He's a good man, and you all need him. And if you understand that your brain is the largest organ in your body utilizing cholesterol, would you like to deprive your brain of nutrients? I don't think so. So the reason the cholesterol is so villainized is because big pharma lobbying, way back, I believe in the 50s, began this campaign of, advocating for low-fat foods, high carb, low fat. If you may remember the so-called food pyramid, which should be flipped on its head, has basically told people that they have to stop eating fat. And that is a whole lie by itself, because most cholesterol that is in your body is produced by your liver. It does not come from what you ate. There is some, of course, correlation. And when the person has a very low cholesterol, which this is what I'm concerned about, to be honest with you, the most, not too high, but too low. Cholesterol is a toxin binder. Cholesterol is the Band-Aid that gets put over damaged arterial wall. If you have too low of the cholesterol, that means your immune system is tanking. So if I see low cholesterol, my first thought is let's get this person out of this downward spiral of poor immunity, potential cancer development, and so forth. The person who hypothesized, and I really want audience to understand, it was a theory that high cholesterol, whatever that is associated with heart disease. A theory, not proven. And I'll take it one step further, kind of jumping ahead to the drugs, but then we'll come back to cholesterol role in a second. Even if you look at the mainstream allopathic science, do you know that the absolute risk reduction for heart attack, people who are taking cholesterol, is 1%? Statin drugs are derived from mycotoxin, mold, they're antibiotics. If people knew that they're taking antibiotics for daily, yearly, dozens of years in their lives, would anybody want to take statins knowing that what I just said? They are basically antibiotics. So you're ruining your gut, you're ruining your pathways of neuron communicating between themselves in the brain. For what? For something that was a theory. And now let's talk about the usefulness of cholesterol. So the cholesterol is a precursor for every single steroid hormone that is made in your body. As I said again, the bulk of cholesterol in your body is manufactured by your liver. So we call it a steroid pathway. If you start with cholesterol at the top, and then you go back and see, and go further down and see how it branches out to cortisol, DHEA, pregnenolone, and pregnenolone is a master hormone from which other sex hormones are derived. If you understand that it's a life-sustaining hormone, or prohormone, I should say, then you would understand that lowering your cholesterol will result in what? Muscle cramps, immune deficiency, potential cancer development, dementia, cognitive changes, loss of libido. If you look at all of those combined and you say, well, why am I taking cholesterol if it's not even, and by the way, talking mainstream again, the only thing cholesterol lowering drugs do is the lower so-called LDL. Now let's break it down. LDL stands up low density lipoprotein. Where is the word cholesterol in those three words? It doesn't exist. HDL stands for high density lipoprotein. So the way I explain it to people, you have a bus that carries people to and from. LDL carries nutrients from the liver through the bloodstream into the cell. HDL takes stuff out of the cell back to be recycled in the liver and so forth. So when you look at, and I do look at those measurements, by the way, David, it's not like I would ignore those, but they mean completely different things to me. If I have an elevated LDL, I look at inflammation, I look at blood sugar dysregulation. If I have a low HDL, it means that there is some sort of a nutrient deficiency. The cells are not getting out as much as, we're not getting things out of the cell as much as we should. So by any means, the cholesterol so-called markers that are used in mainstream should not be interpreted verbatim. Oh, high HDL or high LDL means you need a statin drug and all that source.
What about triglycerides?
The disease truly should be assessed on a lot more broader level and not just by looking at cholesterol.
What about triglycerides? What's your take on there?
So in general, the elevation in triglycerides simply means that you're consuming too much versus what your body can use for energy. So the excess is getting stored as fat. And almost always the elevated triglycerides go hand in hand with lowered HDL, so-called good cholesterol. So it tells me that your body is constantly fighting some sort of underlying cause inflammation, and it's my job to find where that inflammation is coming from. So high triglyceride, low HDL basically equals insulin resistance or poor blood sugar regulation.
So let's talk about that. What is the underlying cause for poor blood sugar regulation? Because that seems to be the driving force of disease-related states that people have in America and around the world.
Absolutely. You could basically tie in the insulin resistance, blood sugar dysregulation to every so-called disease in the Western medical world. So your glucose level that you measure in the blood is basically the available amount of glucose that enters the bloodstream from the food you ate. Then, upon the ingesting, let's say, of a meal, your pancreas will release the hormone called insulin, which is technically a peptide. And insulin is responsible for taking the glucose out of the bloodstream into the cell. When the stressors, such as toxins, chronic infections, bacteria, parasites, fungal, yeast type infections, emotional stressors, when something is basically not allowing your cell receptors for insulin, which, mind you, every single cell in our body has a receptor for insulin. So if the receptors for insulin are not properly functioning, you are not, even if you don't have a ton of glucose in your bloodstream, you're not able to take it out of the bloodstream. And the excessive amounts of glucose in the bloodstream will be tied in with increase in systemic inflammation. Now, mind you, it could manifest, let's say, as eczema. It could manifest as low thyroid function. It could manifest as high blood pressure. You see how we are looking at symptoms, but yet they're all tying in with insulin resistance that causes systemic inflammation to rise up and so certain symptomology to come up as well.
Yeah. So how do you start to address those types of things? What are your baseline recommendations for people?
Well, let's go back to the basics. The father of medicine, Hippocrates, said the same thing as as my mantra today. All diseases begin in the gut. So when somebody comes in or contacts me or we talk about, oh, I have migraine headaches or my blood pressure is skyrocketing, the idea that I have is that I need to find out which of those four root causes, sometimes there are multiple, it's not just one, it could be all four, are contributing to you having those manifestations. And there are a lot of functional medicine practitioners that are really keen on testing for everything. And don't get me wrong, tests are fun. And as a biochemistry person, I love interpreting them. However, I am being pretty keen on not overwhelming people with too many tests, and functional tests run pretty expensive. I do a basic blood panel. We're talking a $10 test, which is complete blood count with differential, including the metabolic panel. I test for certain inflammatory markers. And that's how I figure out, do I have parasites? Do I have candida, which usually those two go together? Do I have nutrient deficiencies? Do I have any other toxin exposures? And by the way, there is a test that is phenomenal. It's just $400 or $500 that I can run and figure out exactly what kind of environmental toxins, mycotoxins like mold, heavy metals, and so forth that we can do. But a lot of the information from just the basic $10, $20 blood test can give me the starting point. And as we said, all diseases start in the gut. So what does that mean? If I start helping a person cleaning up their lifestyle, cleaning up the toxic exposures in their homes, making a home a safe place, and we can talk about all different toxins, like as far as categories are concerned. If I help them understand that everything that they ingest at the tip of that fork will affect the rest of their health, and we start looking at eating all organic food, limiting exposures to pesticides, grounding yourself, respecting circadian rhythms, I can tie this in with a few concepts in a sec, being outside, breathing fresh air. Mind you, no matter how much exposure of toxicants we have outside, the outside air is still cleaner than most people's homes. That's just the fact. So if
What about the clothes you wear? I've heard people talking about the frequencies of clothes like linen versus
yes,
polyester. Do you get into that?
100%.
What do you think
It's
about
the
that?
same. It's the same thing as toxicants that are forever chemicals or plastic exposures or BPA, whatever you want to call them, phthalates. It's the same thing with clothing. If your clothing is made of polyester, you're wearing plastic. You are literally enveloping yourself in a layer of toxins. So if you wear pure
How's that being
cotton
absorbed? It's being absorbed on the skin or something, or
through the skin and inhalation.
yeah.
It's the same thing when I assess toxic exposures and levels of how much people can tolerate. Remember, there are four principal ways for everybody to get rid of their toxins with the help of the immune system. For women, it's five, and I'll say it in a second. But basically, you exhale, so it's respiratory. Your skin, you sweat it out. You pee it out, so that's your kidneys. But the principal and most important organ of detoxification is the liver, production of bile and excretion. That way, which for most people, to be honest, this is where I start. I start exactly with cleaning up the lower end of the digestive tract and then working myself up. So for women, the fifth is their menstrual period, because that's also the way of, excreting unwanted stuff. So if you understand that this is the way of excretion, then the way of intake, it's the same way. It's inhalation, it's skin exposure, it's what you eat, what it is that you surround yourself, whether you put it on your skin, you touch it, and how much of the grounding, which is taking the earth's frequency that is healing in absorbing it through your body, and how much it can offset all the toxic exposures that you're having. So putting your bare feet on the ground for 10 minutes a day, whether it's a beautiful beach in Florida or a rainforest or anywhere except of the concrete jungle of the city, will get you in touch and will help you raise your own vibrational frequency by what you're touching on earth.
Uh-huh. And what about the clothes? What type of material do you recommend for clothing? Cotton
Well,
or
unfortunately,
linen?
we cannot get away from plastics. It's just not practical. But I'm a big proponent. You came back from the gym, take a shower, cotton, anything that came from nature. Cotton does, linen does, silk does. And definitely when you sleep, which is the most important part of your detoxification and rest and rejuvenate period, please do not use any polyester. Please do not sleep on synthetic sheets. Please have your window open. So yes, silk, bamboo, all natural products, no synthetics allowed. Absolutely.
Yeah. And what about like the blue light exposure, cell phone radiation, Wi-Fi boxes? How much of a factor are they in your health? Are those?
They are a huge factor. So before I answer this question, let me just preempt it by saying that all of these toxins disrupt energy production in our cells. So if I tie it in with, let's say, Ayurvedic or Eastern medicine, we have the concept of prana in Ayurveda. We have the concept of qi in traditional Chinese medicine. Well, I translated to my Western colleagues, we have a concept of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, the molecule that is produced by a particular part of your cell called mitochondria. Without getting into too much detail, this is the engine that drives you. When your mitochondria become dysfunctional and die off and then completely stop working, that's when you die. So the EMFs, excessive light exposure, toxins from all different environmental sources, what they do is they disrupt your mitochondrial function. Not only those organelles are not capable of producing enough energy, which ties in with, I have a headache, I have a migraine, I got brain fog. These are all mitochondrial disrupting events. It's not like, oh, you were born with a deficiency for a certain drug that cures your migraine. Nobody is born with drug deficiencies, but you are certainly born with ability to generate energy. And when that ability goes down, because toxins and disruptors like EMF, excessive blue light exposure at night, being near 5G towers, being near the Wi-Fi router when you sleep at night, those will absolutely disrupt what? The primary driver of what is responsible for all processes in your body, and that's circadian rhythm. And to take it one step further, circadian rhythm regulation is a function of a teeny tiny endocrine gland called pineal gland. A lot of people refer to it as a third eye. All of us in energetic and healing world understand that that's your connection to the divine. That's your connection to the source, to the creator. So if the pineal gland, which I just looked up for the sake of, figuring this out, what Wikipedia tells about it almost tells you that it's a rudimentary gland, like it doesn't have much function. You know why? Because the bad actors out there have been trying to basically calcify and destroy pineal gland gradually as much as they possibly could through various ways. One of them is fluoride, mind you, in the water. But the pineal gland connection to the rest of the body processes cannot be overstated. So if you have disruption in energy production, you have disruption in circadian rhythm regulation. And EMF, let's just give it a quick example. Yeah, EMF stands for electromagnetic frequency. It's a non-ionizing radiation. Most people understand the effect of ionizing radiation. You can take Chernobyl explosion, you can take Fukushima explosion, so we get that part. But the non-ionizing radiation, which does not supposedly alter your DNA, well, it does. And the way it alters the DNA of the mitochondria. So again, not to geek out and confuse your audience, but those little energy drivers of our cells, they actually have their own genetic material embedded in them because they used to be bacteria. We, over time, have acquired them, and which is part of the reason why so many functions in our body are outsourced to microbiome. That's a fancy word, which means bacteria and other microorganisms in you. So yes, the EMF directly affects the mitochondrial DNA, causes damage, causes shortening of certain particular types parts of the DNA called telomeres. And a lot of people in anti-aging medicine, they're like, oh, we need to make sure your telomeres are long and elongated, and make sure you don't break down your mitochondria. Well, this is where it comes from. So my strategy, because I like to give people solutions, and sometimes they just don't like to hear that because it interferes with their lifestyle. Well, guess what? Turning off your Wi-Fi router at night can tremendously reduce your EMF exposure and help you sleep better. It's not just how many hours that you sleep, it's how good of a quality that sleep is. I use in my house and tell a lot of my clients and patients to utilize the power of shungite. Shungite is a rock that comes from the area in Russia called Karelia. And it's mined a particular way, and it's a true proven way of reducing your EMF exposure. You can have, for fancy ways, some shungite jewelry on you. I have a bowl of shungite in front of my Wi-Fi router, which I try to turn off at night anyway. I have shungite bowls by my bedstand and in every room where my guests sleep. So there are ways to help. And if you want to find an interesting video online, I'm going to give you his name. It's actually one of the doctors that I studied with initially. His name is Dr. Henry Ely, E-A-L-Y. He's the founder of the Energetic Healing Institute, I believe in Oregon. And check out on YouTube, I believe, the video that he put out, how he put the cell phone on the ground, on earth, on grass, and tried to make a phone call. And definitely the cell phone was struggling to connect. And then he took a piece of shungite and literally put it in front of the screen, and 80% of the measurable EMF radiation, he had the voltage meter to take a look at that, was blocked.
So there
are definitely ways of helping people out. I wish we can get rid of all those 5G towers. Nobody needs them. Nobody needs this so-called 5G internet. You can't even perceive it. The damage from those, right now there's I believe a settlement that just happened with AT&T. The person said that, I believe it was either dementia or cancer. Don't quote me on that. I honestly cannot remember exactly, but they just won a settlement, the family, and the tower was taken down because it was affecting their health.
What about what's worse, the towers in the city and Wi-Fi everywhere and blue lights, or the pesticides and so forth in the country near your farmlands?
The dark forces of the cabal try to get us in every which way possible. And the 5G, the pesticides, herbicides, depletion of the soil of nutrients, these are all strategies that have been implemented not yesterday. This has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, what is worse? Well, they're both horrible.
Yeah.
And the way I like to think of what it is that I can do to implement the strategy of mitigation. So I just mentioned to you using Shanghai, turning off your Wi-Fi router at night, definitely not having any, and I mean any, no cell phone, no iPads, no computers in your bedrooms would help you out with that. And which is pretty simple to do. So you may say EMF is horrible, but it's kind of easy to mitigate if you just put your mind to it. With herbicides and pesticides, it's a little bit harder because even if you buy organic, which I always encourage all my patients, I don't care what exactly your diet is necessarily, as long as it's whole, real food source and organically sourced. It has to be clean. But because the exposure to pesticides is so vast, it's very hard to avoid it. And that gives you probably my answer that I think pesticides and herbicides are even worse because you cannot fully get rid of them, even when you do mitigation strategies. And that's why basically a detox, popular word nowadays, it's not a 1 week or 3 week or 2 months course, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. What do you use for detoxing? Do you have a
So the first thing, let's get to the basics. The first thing we want to do is we want to eat and drink clean. The water contamination that could be a topic of the whole different conversation. If people only knew what comes out of their tap, they would puke. And I don't care what part of the country you live in. I used to live in California, and it used to be those environmental, healthy, green place. The water was absolutely horrible.
What about well water? Do you like well water?
It was tap water, whatever.
What about well water? Is well water good, or do you think it gets contaminated too?
I believe it does get contaminated because of all the pesticides that are leaching through the soil down below. Although, based on what I've done just for fun, testing, let's say, a well water source versus municipal, well water was coming out cleaner, to be honest. Yeah. However, how much of that will be remaining that way, it's very hard to say. So if I look at somebody and they say, well, I want to get rid of disease A, B, C, and D, I'm like, okay, these are manifestations. What you need to understand is you need to stop getting poisons into your body. One of the interesting, funny sayings in a lot of my seminars on functional medicine was that you cannot get wet while you're still in the shower. So if you're still getting exposed and showered by all these pesticides, herbicides, and whatnot, how can you get cleaned up? How can you detox? So the first strategy is limit exposure. I'm not saying stop exposure. That's impossible. In fact, even if you live in Amazonian rainforest, you've been intoxicated by something. It's just unfortunate reality, the world we live in. So water source. Well will be better, but I still recommend distillation and or reverse osmosis. Those are the only two things that truly can get rid of forever chemicals.
But don't you have to be careful with drinking distilled water because it can leach more electrolytes out of your body? Like I heard of the story of the lady drinking a gallon of distilled water after she was heavily sweating and she died because it doesn't have any minerals or electrolytes in it naturally. It's like dead water.
I would tend to kind of differ from that. I don't think that's the reason she died. There must have been something underlying. I would like to see some sort of a whatever it was, case analysis and lab values, whatever it was, just to see what exactly was going on with her. But no, you are getting a lot of minerals even through not the bestest food, but if you buy hopefully organic, you are going to get some of the zincs and vitamins and magnesium, although I must say this is where supplementation also comes into play. So yes, I don't have a problem. In fact, I encourage people to drink distilled water if they cannot get reverse osmosis unit installed in their homes. But by the same token, I would also give them support on the trace minerals like boron, manganese, or super minerals like zinc and copper and iron and magnesium. Absolutely, I would supplement. only because our soils have been depleted. If we were on the farm 150 years ago, we would not have that.
Do you
But today we must.
do you avoid plastics? I mean, it's kind of hard to avoid plastics if you're getting your food from a grocery store, you know.
You're absolutely right. So yes. So my strategy, when I come back from the grocery store, I use containers of either stainless steel or glass. And that's how I just don't expose myself as much as I can to plastics. One step further, David, if you go to a grocery store and you got yourself a pallet of bottled water, and it's called filtered water, purified water, but it sits in those, 16-ounce plastic bottles. When they bottle that water, there's so much heat generated before the water comes to you. So even if the bottle is labeled BPA free, it's not plastic free. In fact, an average American person consumes, I think it was called the amount of plastics in the size of a credit card on a yearly basis. You just consume it all the time. So yeah, the bottled water in those plastic bottles is not a good source. Of course, if you had a choice between drinking tap water and having a bottled water, you'd choose the second. But for your own home, definitely ask people to get rid of as many plastics as possible. No more, plastic containers you get back from let's say leftover meal from the restaurant, immediately put it somewhere else. Definitely don't expose it to heat.
Yeah. Yeah, they use a lot of those styrofoams, which are pretty toxic too, aren't they? The styrofoams for,
Yep.
for restaurants. Yeah.
A friend of mine sent me a very interesting video of basically looking at a Starbucks coffee cup after the coffee has been drunk, and what literally happens to it, how much of the disintegrated plastic compounds are leaching into that coffee. Not to mention that if you buy mainstream coffee, let's say from Starbucks or whatever grocery store, and it's not organic, you're consuming mold.
Yeah. Wow. Another issue you've brought up to me is mercury, and that's related to people's exposure to, I guess, mostly dental cavities.
Yes. So
in fish.
Yes. So it is a huge deal. And you know what's sad? American Dental Association does not recognize mercury as a toxin. They're still advocating for the use of amalgam fillings, amalgam meaning blended in, which is the components of primarily silver and mercury. They're still using them. They're using them on kids. They're using them on those Denticare, low income clinics. Definitely in California, when I was in practice, I saw that. They're using them on prison mates. So the lobbying of the industry, both the American Dental Association, American Medical Association, let's just call it what they are. They're for-profit, private associations that are heavily being lobbied. And then they, on the other hand, lobby for themselves too. It's special interest groups. So yes, ADA has never denounced the use of mercury. And let's just make it clear. There is no safe mercury level. Yes, we test mercury. There are certain tests that allow you to see how far in the spectrum you are. But to tell me that, oh, just a little bit of mercury is fine, no. So let me break it down to kind of simplify things. Mercury essentially has two forms. Inorganic mercury, which is the most toxic, and that's the one that comes from the dental fillings. And then you have organic mercury, so-called methyl mercury, and that's the one that comes from consuming seafood rich in mercury. There's a smaller category, which technically is inorganic mercury. It's called ethyl mercury, and that comes from the adjuvants that have been used in different poisons in them. So the most difficult part to get rid of in mercury is the inorganic type, because the half-life of mercury is over 30 years. That means that it takes over 30 years for your body to finally excrete it. And the reason is mercury, like a lot of heavy metals and toxins, they love fat. Well, guess what? Every single nerve in our body is enveloped in what we call myelin sheath. That's fat. Our brains, 80% of cholesterol is utilized in the brain. That's fat. Why do you think people get brain fog, dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and so forth associated with mercury toxicities? Because that's where it gets stored. Even if you had all of your silver mercury containing fillings removed, there is no guarantee that you don't have storage systems still remaining in your body. And mercury is a doozy to detox from. There are some compounds, natural as well as synthetic, that we call them chelators. I'm not a huge fan of those for different reasons, but they could work in an acute situation. But it's very important for those that understand that, let's say you have some mercury fillings in your mouth. A regular dentist, if you go to, will likely ridicule you. Oh, why would you want to get rid of them? They're fine. They're not leaking. Although you're off-gassing and releasing mercury every single time you bite down in that filling. Every single time a micro amount gets released and goes where? To where it likes to hide, which is in, fat substances in your body. So the way the regular dentistry, conventional allopathic dentistry, has been operating for dozens of years is that they don't understand, they don't recognize the problem. And even if they say, okay, we're going to remove your silver fillings, the number one reason, and again, I'm not against vanity, it's all wonderful and dandy, but the number one reason they remove the silver fillings is that, oh, now we're going to do white fillings. They're going to look so much nicer in your mouth, and they don't break down the same way over time. There's absolute truth to it. Although there are some compounds in polymer composite plastic fillings that also contain either mercury or fluoride or both. But the bottom line is that if you truly want to do it right, and it's not easy because those dentists are not, mainstream, the best thing to do is to find a holistic, or they call them biological dentists, because they will implement certain protocols of how they're going to remove those toxin compounds from your mouth, how they're going to remove those fillings, and what they're going to seal them with.
That costs probably thousands of dollars, though, right? I mean, it's not.
You're absolutely right, David. Because to be honest, this is the truth that is unfortunately out there. Allopathic medicine gouges people. I call it sick care because it's not health care. In fact, most allopathic medicine treatment of chronic diseases is a joke. It's a band-aid. It's symptom relief. And when they mask one symptom, 10 others come by a year or so later. With functional and natural medicine, sometimes there is also a lot of grifters out there that, will give you the protocols and a lot of wishy-washy things, even though they do mean well. But it goes back to what I said earlier. If they're not addressing the four main causes of where this come from, and let's just say we're going to give you something to help with your chronic inflammation, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I use it too, but you need to understand where that inflammation came from. So to answer your question on biological dentistry, yes, it is not inexpensive. And a lot of times you have to do quite a bit of research. I'll tell you this, even we are in Florida, I had a very hard time finding an office that would be something I could refer patients to. I got one in St. Petersburg, not even, where I live. So yes, it's an issue. In the past, I tell you, people were traveling to other states, like to Texas and to Arizona and New York, just to get the work done. But one thing, if you have an issue with presence of mercury fillings, you can definitely start your own detoxification from that. And remember how I said you cannot get cleaned up and dried up while you're still standing in the shower. So there's certain herbal compounds you can do. People have heard of the magic algae called chlorella. Yes, chlorella is a binder and a detoxifier. And there are certain things people could do to help themselves. I'm not saying it's going to cure the issue they have. They still have to get those fillings out, but that's just something to at least minimize of what that heavy metal is doing to their bodies.
What's that? What the one from thrombokinase, the one that everybody's talking about? You mentioned it.
Oh,
does that help with that?
Yes. So lumbar kinase actually is not related so much to heavy metal detoxification, but it is the category of proteolytic enzymes. Basically, it breaks down proteins. And proteins are present in scar tissue. Proteins are present in, post-chronic disease or during chronic disease when they're not, when certain foods are not digested well because you have a leaky gut dysbiosis. So yes, proteolytic enzymes are very helpful in actually treating the root cause of most diseases, which comes from your gut. So lumbar kinase is my favorite of the proteolytic enzymes, but I like to use them in kind of a complex. So There's serrapeptase, and that comes from silkworms. There's lumbrikinase, which comes from earthworms. There's nattokinase. Nattokinase is even making its way to the mainstream news because of the work of certain doctors in the freedom movement, which is fine. And it is a definite a compound that has been studied and researched specifically to help people with cardiovascular issues because it breaks down fibrin clots. Fibrin is the protein that causes blood clotting. So nattokinase is wonderful. Just don't overestimate what it can do. But typically, if you can combine a few of them together, there's a wonderful formula by a very small company in New York called Allegheny Nutrition called Cardio Support. But it's not just cardio. It's basically inflammation support, life support, you can call it. Anybody could benefit from it. And yes, those enzymes absolutely would help.
Well, Dr. Carrie, I think we've covered a great overview in our first discussion, and hope maybe we do some more follow-up in the future. But do you have any final thoughts or message you'd like to leave us with?
Well, yes, my message is very simple. I'd like people to understand that they are the CEOs of their health. Don't look for a white knight coming in there to rescue you. And even
especially
if you are still working,
especially if they have a white coat and they're on NBC, they're probably
yes, definitely. Don't expect a white knight to come out and tell you they're going to rescue you. You have to be an active and willing participant, and that's how I work with people. And if I could tell you, you may have heard the phrase, you are what you eat. I'm going to expand it and say you are what you absorb. So please take note of clean up where you live, clean up what you eat. Yes, organic food, absolutely. It's not that I'm going to pinpoint certain things you should be eating and you should not be eating, but the source is important. Clean food means grass-fed beef if you're a meat eater, and I have absolutely nothing against it. And we can talk later about vibrational frequency and quality of organic versus not organic food, because it does tie in with energetic value. And get right with your spirituality connection. Get right with mind, body, and soul. Don't think that only one of those components can get you healthy. You are an energetic being. Get right with God. And I hope that it will only bring you the best in your health coming forward.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And we'll put your contact information in our description for those that want to reach out and connect with you.
That will be great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And that's it for our broadcast today. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.